All right, Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes, illustrated by Lynd Ward. Houghton Mifflin Harcourt is the publisher. And we are in Chapter 6, Saltwater Tea, and starting Section 3. In Section 2, Johnny is delivering the messages from the Boston Observer and to all the Sons of Liberty, great patriots, and runs into Scylla Lapham at the town pump again. And she's kind of, telling him about what's been happening at the Lapham's house. Dusty has run away to sea. Dove is just like always. And then the girls are still trying to find their forever person. But the important part is that Johnny ends up at Dr. Warren's, and he is delivering the message, and then he pulls out his hand so he can warm his hands by the fire. And Dr. Warren had been writing, and he stops. Johnny can tell he's looking at his hand. He says, "My boy, let me see your hand," in a gentle voice, so non-threatening. And Johnny does not reply. It talks about him counting to 10 like he's kind of learned to do, but he does not want the doctor to look at it. He actually lies and says that it's been like that since birth. And so the doctor says, "God's will be done." Like, what are you going to do? Johnny will not share. So we move on. Section 3. Outside, Johnny could hear shouting, yelling, whistles, the running of feet. With the coming of night, the Sons of Liberty were abroad, tacking up Mr. Adams's placards. Remember the ones that were printed at the shop. Tonight, Rab was not out with them, although he had been off once or twice of late, helping to frighten the tea consignees out of Boston to the protection of a handful of British soldiers stationed on Castle Island. Johnny was too young to be a son of Liberty. But when the observers met, the boys always stayed in the room below to run errands for them, and it was always Rab who mixed the fragrant punch with which the meeting ended. The meetings. All over Boston was a feeling of excitement. Everyone knew that the Dartmouth was but a few miles away. Great events were brewing. Johnny went to the door to see what the clamor was. A courageous Tory was chasing the men whom he had found tacking a placard on his property. They had let him chase them thus far to Dark Salt Lane, and now had turned on him. So the Tory, the man loyal to England, is chasing the Patriots like one against many. They get him away from his safe spot, and then they turn on him like to beat him up. Such street brawling made Johnny feel sick. He closed the door, sat down beside Rab, and began slicing lemons, oranges, and limes. "Rab?" "Yes." "What will they decide, those men upstairs?" "You heard Sam Adams. If possible, the ships will sail home again with their tea. We've got 20 days. "But if the governor won't agree?" "He won't. You don't know Hutchinson. I do. And you saw how happy Sam was this morning. He knows the governor a lot better than I do." And what next, Rab?" Johnny heard blows and oaths from the street outside, like cursing. His hands shook. He put down the knife so Rab wouldn't know. They were doing something awful to the Tory. "As soon as we go upstairs with our punch, we'll know. Look at Sam Adams. If he looks as pleased as an old dog fox with a fat pullet in his mouth, we'll know they've agreed to violence if everything else fails. He doesn't care much anymore about our patching up our differences with England. He'd just about welcome a war." So look at the changing attitude. This is as things are brewing. So goes in the attic, so goes all the opinion out there. "But the king's warships are in the harbor. They'll protect the tea. They'll fight." "We can fight too." Rab was putting the last delicate touches to his kettle full of brew, for tonight the punch would be hot. He was grating nutmegs, cautiously sprinkling in cloves, and breaking up cinnamon bark. "Taste it, Johnny. That's Madeira Mr. Hancock brought with him. That Madeira is first class." But Johnny heard a low moaning in the street, close close to the shut door. That Tory who had been so brave and foolish as to follow the Sons of Liberty down a black alley was alone now, was sobbing, not from pain, but from humiliation. Johnny declined to taste the punch. Mr. Loren called down the ladder. "Boys, ready with your punch?" "They made up their minds fast tonight," said Rab. I rather thought they would." Johnny carried a handful of pewter cups and the big wooden bowl. Rab followed with 2 pitchers of his spicy brew. The attic where the boys commonly slept looked strange enough with those chairs pulled out and arranged for the meeting. John Hancock sat in the moderator's chair. His face looked white and drawn. Probably his head still ached. Beside him was Sam Adams leaning toward him, whispering and whispering. Johnny thought how the Tories were saying that Sam Adams seduced John Hancock even as the devil had seduced Eve by a constant whispering in his ear. Adams turned his face as Johnny set down the wooden bowl on the baize-covered box before the moderator. Johnny had never seen an old dog fox with a fat pullet in his mouth, but he recognized the expression when he saw it. Okay, maybe satisfaction? Rab poured the punch, and instantly the tense silence was broken. The men were on their feet, crowding up about the bowl. Rab and Johnny were well known. Here was Paul Revere clinking his cup with Rab, and John Hancock was telling Johnny how far too well his old slave woman guarded his privacy. Remember when she was not letting Johnny see Mr. Hancock because Johnny had to deliver the message, and she's like, "No, you can't go into his room." So he had to leave the written message. Actually, 3 men had come to the house to tell him the first of the tea ships had been sighted, but he had not known anything was afoot until he got Johnny's bill on his tray. Then he guessed what had happened. "Here's to December the 16th. Hear, hear." They drank to that last day, the day on which the tea must be destroyed unless it was allowed to return to England. And Johnny saw that Sam Adams had carried them all with him. They did not honestly want the tea returned and a peaceful settlement made. They wanted grievances and more grievances. Well, yes, armed warfare. Things were in such a state they did not honestly believe there could be any permanent friendly settlement with the mother country. Johnny looked about through the haze of tobacco smoke. There was Dr. Warren. He was talking with Uncle Loren and John Adams about that article he had written for the newspaper. Suddenly he lifted his head, smiled, almost laughed. Johnny did not know why Warren smiled. Why had Johnny been such a fool? Why couldn't he have shown his hand to the doctor? He bit into his lower lip. After his rudeness to Dr. Warren, he did not see how he ever could go to him and say, "I've changed my mind. I want you to look at it. I think you are the only person in the world who can help me." So when Dr. Warren, a little later, looked toward Johnny, ready to smile, forgive his discourtesy, the boy looked away. He was so embarrassed. He was rude again. Sam Adams was standing at the far end of the room, and Mr. Hancock still sat, his head in his hands. Adams clapped slightly, and instantly the conversation stopped. "Gentlemen," he said, "tonight we have made our decision, and know the method by which the detested tea can be destroyed, if the ships are not allowed to return. Here we have with us 2 of exactly the sort of boys or young men we intend to use for our great purpose. 2 boys in whom we have implicit trust. If it is the wish of the assembled club members, I suggest we approach them with our proposition tonight, enlist their aid. 20 days will be up before we know. We'd best get on with our plans." The members once more took their seats, but the pewter cups of punch were passing from hand to hand. Only Will Molyneux was too restless to sit. He was muttering to himself. Ben Church sat alone. He often did. No one really liked him. All agreed the boys were to be told. First, Adams said to the boys, raise your right hands. Swear by the great name of God himself never, for as long as you live, to divulge to anyone the secret matters now entrusted to you. Do you so swear? The boys swore. Hancock was not looking at them. He sat with his aching head in his hands. There's no chance, not one, those ships will be allowed to return. The mass meetings, which will be held almost daily demanding the return of the tea, are to arouse public opinion and to persuade the world we did not turn to violence until every other course had been blocked to us. When the 20 days are up, on the night of the 16th of December, those ships are going to be boarded. That tea will be dumped in Boston Harbor. For each ship, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the brig, the Beaver, we will need 30 stout, honest, fearless men and boys. Will you be one, Rab? He did not say Rab and Johnny, as the younger boy noticed. Was this because he thought Johnny too cripple-handed for chopping open sea chests, or merely because he knew Rab better and he was older? Of course, sir. How many other boys could you find for the night's work? Strong and trustworthy boys, for if 1 ounce of tea is stolen, the whole thing becomes a robbery, not a protest. Rab thought, 8 or 10 tonight, but give me a little time so I can feel about a bit, and I can furnish 15 or 20. Boys who can keep their mouths shut? Yes. Paul Revere said, I can furnish 20 or more from about North Square. Not one is to be told in advance just what the work will be, nor who the others are, nor the names of the men who instigated this tea party, that is, the gentlemen gathered here tonight. Simply as they love their country and liberty and hate tyranny, they are to gather in this shop on the night of December 16th, carrying with them such disguises as they can think of, and each armed with an axe or hatchet. It will be as you say. The discussion became more general. Each of these 3 groups must have a leader, men who could keep discipline. I'll go for one, said Paul Revere. Dr. Warren warned him. Look here, Paul, it has been decided this work must be done by apprentices, strangers, folk little known about Boston. The East India Company may bring suit. If you are recognized, I'll risk it. Uncle Lorne was motioning to the boys to leave the conspirators. They did not want to leave, but they did. And that's the end of section 3. We'll do the next 2 sections together. So click subscribe, come back for math videos or more of Johnny Tremain. Bye-bye.